Introduction. A mysterious, dark-skinned woman sits in a dark shack, illuminated only by the light of the moon. Skulls, shrunken heads, and pentagrams decorate the eerie environment as she ruthlessly sacrifices a chicken with a crazed look in her eye. She picks up a cloth doll with button eyes and cackles as she stabs it in the heart with a pin. Somewhere, an innocent man clutches his chest and falls over, dead. The same scene has been playing in movies and TV over and over again as a sensationalized depiction of what mainstream America thinks when they hear the word hoodoo. It evokes an exoticized danger, an image of a witch that stands in contrast to the poised, stylish, and white witches of shows like American Horror Story. While public attitudes towards witchcraft have certainly softened in the past few years, especially with the end of the Satanic Panic, that softened image has mainly benefited forms of witchcraft associated with whiteness. Irish mysticism, Wicca, crystals, and astrology are all accepted parts of the modern New Age spirituality movement. However, hoodoo remains the subject of misinformation, confusion, and appropriation. Many of the spells and practices that are shared among young white witches today stem from hoodoo. Yet proper credits are rarely given for the simple fact that few people outside of the practice actually know what hoodoo is. Defining hoodoo is not a simple task. It is a complex tapestry of cultures and history birthed out of Africa, like life itself. Woven throughout hoodoo are the stories of Black ancestors that would have been lost without the practice. Modern practitioners understand the importance of that practice and are working tirelessly to bring the practice out of the shadows and keep it alive. By reading this book, you too will be part of keeping that history alive, like so many who came before. Chapter 1. What is hoodoo? There are no quick and easy answers to the question of what hoodoo is. This powerful practice is deeply complex and interwoven within the culture and history of those in the African diaspora. Hoodoo means something different to every practitioner and every community. Despite the images we often associate with hoodoo, it looks different as well. Without knowledge of the culture and practice, many people would not be able to identify a practitioner or a hoodoo spell if they saw one. Lies and stereotypes about the nature of hoodoo have made it difficult for people to learn about the practice, watering down information with falsehoods. Many of the texts about hoodoo are written by white people outside the practice who brought their biases and ignorance into their so-called research. Hoodoo is inherently threatening to the dominant power structures that seek to oppress and force people into assimilation. Whether you're reading this book to become a practitioner yourself, or just to further your knowledge of a beautiful practice, educating yourself about hoodoo is a revolutionary journey in and of itself. Folk magic. Hoodoo falls under the large umbrella of folk magic. Folk magic refers to the spiritual practices done by the common people of a certain community. This differs from forms of ceremonial magic that are practiced only by elites or people within a particular social class. Because they are practiced by common people, these spiritual practices exist to serve practical matters. Far from attempting major spiritual warfare, shape-shifting, or magic powers, folk magic often targets things like health, emotional wellness, fertility, and wealth. The tools of folk magic are similarly common, with many practices using stones, herbs, and animal products. Another important aspect of folk magic is that it is passed down from generation to generation. Some magical practices, like Wicca or crystal healing, are very individualistic, either because they were created outside of a communal context or because they have been divorced and appropriated from their original source, that they've become culturally meaningless. Folk magic practices are wrapped up in the ethnic and cultural identity of a particular people. These practices are taught from person to person. They absorb new knowledge and adapt to changing contexts. They affect people within the culture even if they don't practice. Folk magic practices are also distinct from religions. Religions have a specific hierarchy, designated roles, canonized text, and strict internal structures that people within the religion have to abide by. While folk magic practices have common beliefs, practices, and concepts, Each practitioner acts on their own. There are many folk magic practices in America, such as Appalachian Mountain magic and hex work, with hoodoo being one of them. Hoodoo folk magic, also referred to as conjure or root work, is specific to Black descendants of slaves. It was born out of a unique combination of African spirituality, Christianity, and Native American practices that came about as enslaved people worked to protect themselves and cling to a unique ethnic cultural identity. While the words are often used interchangeably, hoodoo is distinct from voodoo. Voodoo is a religion that originated in West Africa, and for that reason, there are many spiritual and practical similarities between it and hoodoo. However, many hoodoo practitioners do not subscribe to the voodoo religion. Core beliefs of hoodoo. Each hoodoo practitioner brings their own worldview, mortality, and religious beliefs into their hoodoo practice. However, there are specific guiding beliefs within hoodoo that influence the practice. A conjurer needs to understand and abide by these rules to avoid risk of causing spiritual harm to themselves or others. Purpose. Hoodoo exists as a means for us humans, as physical beings, to access the spiritual world to influence our everyday lives. We can do this by accessing the spirits so they can lend us their wisdom and spiritual power because of the spirituality that exists in our physical world. Hoodoo gives us spiritual control over our lives, something that was priceless to our ancestors who were denied so much agency over their minds and bodies. The spirits. African religions are often misidentified as polytheistic because of a misunderstanding of the concept of God being in all things. In the hoodoo worldview, there is one creator, God, who interacts with us through all the things in the form of spirits. Spirits can influence our lives, and we can similarly influence them. For example, spirits cannot move past spiritual boundaries or barriers. However, they can be invited and called upon for a specific purpose. There are unique types of spirits that we can interact with differently. Ancestors. Ancestry is incredibly important to the practice of hoodoo, as we believe that we can access our ancestors through the practice. Blood is very important in hoodoo. It carries not only who we are, but where we came from. Curses, blessings, and spiritual energy can be passed down from generation to generation. By tapping into our ancestral line, we can gain knowledge and power. Our ancestors can answer our questions about our past and future, help us in our spell casting, and offer protection. Having access to our ancestors is incredibly important for us descendants of slaves. Many of us can't trace our ancestry through traditional means, as marriages and births of enslaved people weren't properly recorded. Hoodoo allows us to connect to our lost ancestors and reclaim our ethnic identities. The importance of our blood ancestors also relates to one of the most important yet controversial aspects of hoodoo. Because hoodoo is a folk magic practice, it is attached to a specific group, that being the Black descendants of slaves. For that reason, hoodoo is a closed practice, meaning it is not accessible to everyone except Black folks. People who aren't descendants of slaves do not have access to the ancestral practice and knowledge to engage in these practices. This has become a topic of conversation as more and more people learn about hoodoo and the issue of cultural appropriation. There is so much that can be learned by communicating with our folk magic practitioners and educating yourself on practices outside of your culture and ethnicity. However, if you aren't a part of the African diaspora, you must respect the sacredness of this practice and refrain from trying to engage in it. Without the guidance and power of Black ancestors, you risk causing spiritual harm to yourself or others. You also risk harming actual hoodoo practitioners and the culture at large by spreading misinformation. The Loa. The Loa are the manifestations of God in voodoo and are often used by hoodoo practitioners of any religion. These are spirits that exist for God to interact with us as humans in a way that we can understand. The number of Loa can be infinite, as new Loa can be born every day. They are immortal, but can be absorbed back into the Creator God when they achieve their goals. We will go into more detail on specifics of the Loa later. But by understanding and engaging with the Loa, we can access their power and achieve our goals through spellcasting. Christianity. Hoodoo is heavily influenced by Christianity, as enslaved people were forced to assimilate into a Christian society. While you don't have to be a Christian to practice hoodoo, it is in many ways a Christian practice, and understanding these similarities can help strengthen your conjuring. The Bible. In hoodoo, the Bible is more than a sacred text. It is a talisman. It can function as both a source of protection and a spell book. You can also use the Bible in spellcasting by leaving it open to a specific page and facing a specific direction. Throughout the history of hoodoo, there are numerous stories of slaves using the Bible to heal curses, carrying it with them to survive dangerous situations or even put curses on their enemies. Moses. Moses is incredibly important in the history of slavery, as the story of one man leading his people to freedom was an inspiring and empowering tale that helped many slaves spiritually prepare themselves to escape. In hoodoo, Moses is considered the paragon of a hoodoo conjurer. His miracles are viewed as hoodoo spellcasting, as he was able to utilize the spiritual to manipulate the physical world and achieve a specific goal. The afterlife. The specificity of the afterlife depends on the religious beliefs of the conjurer. However, hoodoo maintains that there is an afterlife, and that, upon our death, there is a spiritual substance that separates from our physical body and lives on in the spiritual world. Through magic, we can breach the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realm and interact with those in the afterlife. Spellcasting. The word spell often conjures very dramatic, bombastic images. While some spells can certainly be more aesthetically interesting than others, a spell is really just the individual bringing their actions and their intentions into harmony to achieve a spiritual goal. This usually includes a ritual act and a combination of physical items. Hoodoo magic follows a few consistent rules. Sympathic magic. The core of sympathic magic is that all things are connected by invisible strings. By manipulating one thing, you can affect another. This type of magic falls into two subcategories: homeopathic and contagious. Homeopathic magic. Homeopathic magic states that like things attract one another. It is also referred to as imitation magic or mimicry magic. We see this in the Paleolithic times, as it is theorized that the paintings of successful hunts were a form of magic used to manifest the hunt. This idea has also been manifested as superstitions and taboos in many cultures. For example, the Inuit people discourage children from playing games that wrap strings around their fingers for fear it will cause them to get their fingers caught in the net of a harpoon. Contagious magic. Contagious magic states that once two things come into contact, they will always be connected. This is commonly utilized in taglocks, a piece of a person that can be used in magic spells to influence them. These are usually things like fingernails, hair, or bodily fluids. Hoodoo practitioners are often very wary of how they dispose of these things for fear they could fall into the wrong hands and be used against them. Retributive justice. Hoodoo follows a general moral principle of causing the most good in the world. Good and evil forces do exist and are in conflict. However, within this moral compass, Hoodoo does allow practitioners to harm others in revenge or to punish an act. It is believed that when a Hoodoo practitioner is functioning within God's will, any harm they do is also within God's will if God allows the harm to happen. This harm should be comparable to the sin being punished. Black magic. Sometimes black magic is used to refer to all magic that harms people. In this book, black magic refers to harmful spells that don't have to abide by the ethical limitations of retributive justice. Black magic spells are destructive and extremely powerful. Because of this, they are very difficult to cast and pose a big risk to the caster. Not only can you cast them incorrectly and cause harm to come to you and yours, but if the person you are cursing is also a conjurer, you risk having that curse sent back to you. Hoodoo terminology. Conjurer / root worker / practitioner, a person who practices hoodoo. Taglock, personal worries, something associated with the physical person because of the physical contacts within the person's body. This includes a piece of clothing, hair, a signature, or bodily fluids. Altar, a spiritual space used for contacting spirits and casting spells. Budding / flipping, to cut the tip of a candle and feed a new wick from the bottom up. This is used to reverse the conditions of the candle. Condition oil, an oil made for a particular purpose or to address a particular problem. Crossroads, a place where two roads meet and form an X. Curios, items with spiritual properties such as bones, rocks, and charms. Curse, a spell meant to cause someone harm. Deities, spiritual beings that are worshipped and worked. Divination, to access the spiritual world through a ritual to obtain information about the past, present, or future. This is often done with bones, tarot cards, candles, or dreams. Establish intentions, to make a firm choice about what you want and your desired outcome for a magical ritual. This can be done through prayer, meditation, speaking it out loud, or writing it down. Executions, to light a new candle for the same purpose before the old candle fully burns out. Unction / dressing / anointing, to rub oil on an object to invite spiritual activity, purify, and set intention. Feeding, to add oil or spiritual water to a mojo bag to keep it spiritually strong and active. Honey jar / sweetening jar, a jar spell uses a sweetener like honey, molasses, or sugar to sweeten a particular thing. Hot footing, a spell that banishes or drives out a particular person. Lady-hearted, a hoodoo practitioner who does not cause harm to people or animals. Lighting the lights, to light a candle and pray at it every night until it burns out. Loading, to cut a hole in the bottom of a candle and fill it with something such as oil, herbs, or powders. Mojo bag, a talisman made from a bag filled with curios, herbs, or oils that are worn on the body for a particular purpose such as protection. Poison through the feet, when a person walks through dust or oil that was meant to harm them. Petition papers, a piece of paper with goals written on it related to a particular spell. Voodoo / vodou / vadu, a religion practiced mainly in Louisiana, Haiti, Cuba, and Dominican and West African. Work / chores / spells, a ritual meant to achieve a particular purpose. Conclusion. Hoodoo may seem complicated, but don't let that stop you from exploring it deeper. As you begin to learn about hoodoo and its rich, beautiful history, your own path to being a conjurer will begin to reveal itself to you. As a folk magic practice, hoodoo doesn't require you to seek out a church, defer to some clergy or upper echelon, or abide by any strict codes of conduct. The beauty of folk magic is that while its practice is highly individualistic, it also connects people. Through the individual practice of folk magic, you will have access to your Black ancestors and an important part of Black culture that has managed to survive all these generations despite the efforts of the power that be. Chapter 2. History of Hoodoo. Hoodoo history is Black history. Much of African history has been lost due to colonization and the ravages of the slave trade. While there is so much information that we can never reclaim, Hoodoo carries with it traces of our African ancestry that can help us better understand who we are and where we came from. African origins. During the transatlantic slave trade from 1514 to 1867, over 12 million Africans were stolen away from their homelands, forced into inhumane conditions on cargo ships, and placed into a life of abuse, servitude, and dehumanization at the hands of white colonizers and enslavers. Most of these slaves came from West and Central Africa, and with them came cultures, beliefs, and practices that we still see today, not only in Hoodoo, but in Black culture as a whole. Bantu Congo. The Bantu Congo people were one of many ethnic groups that were targeted during slavery. One of the things we get from them is the cosmogram. This symbol is a cross-shaped image that symbolizes the rising and setting of the sun and the movement of cosmic energy. One line represents the boundary that separates the physical and spiritual world, while the other line represents the barrier between the Creator God and spirits of the dead. These boundaries aren't strict as energy and beings can move through them.